Okay, we are live. So I'm excited to start, but we will also wait for a couple of people to stream in. We are live right now with Minette Norman. She is an incredible person and a thought leader, and so many more things that and so much more, really. And I'll be introducing her shortly. But if you're wondering what you're seeing on your screen right now on LinkedIn as you're scrolling through your feed, um, we are going to be talking about how to lead meetings that empower every voice. And I'm sure many of us have been in meetings where we're not sure why exactly we're there or whether we should be speaking up, whether our voice is heard. And the whole premise of setting up this chat today was really to unpack whether the meetings that we are attending, the meetings that we're organizing, are helping or hurting our teams. And yeah, we're just really excited to talk about meetings today and uncover or discover various ways we can empower every voice in the room. But before we begin, and as more people join us, I just wanted to share also an upcoming event that we are organizing, which is the Wellbeing Leaders Roundtable. This is a flagship event that Calm Collective organizes about twice a year. Although we did take a bit of a break last year for our own mental well-being, and it's going to be about how we drive performance through well-being. There's a recent research by Oxford University that showcase or that basically shared or identified the link between high performing companies and organizations where people had good or positive well-being. So there is a correlation, and we are going to be doing a deep dive into how AIA and Elf Beauty do that in their own organizations, both regionally and globally. And if you're tuning in and just listening to my monologue right now, feel free to share a comment on LinkedIn, say hi, so we know someone's listening, and share where you're tuning in from. Okay, so we look forward to hearing from you in the comments. And as you're warming up, yeah, feel free to share any thoughts on the topic as well. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to be starting soon. And yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you for joining our live stream today. And we're going to be talking about meetings that empower every voice. And I'll just share a bit of an introduction before we jump into into this meeting proper. So yeah, we're going to be talking about meetings, and in today's fast-paced work environment, we're always organizing meetings. I don't know about you, but I find myself in days where I'm just in back-to-back meetings, and half the time I'm like, oh, was this really necessary? Was this really productive? Did I get the chance to share what I really wanted to share? So I'm just someone who's quiet by nature and also introverted, which means that I usually take a bit more time to think and think and process what's going on before I can offer my contribution. So in a room or in a meeting where there are different types of personalities, the question here is really like, yeah, how can we create a truly inclusive and productive environment for people to speak up? Or are we inadvertently or kind of like accidentally creating a culture where it actually promotes silence with unspoken anxieties and stifled ideas that go missed. So today we're going to have a conversation with Minette Norman. I'm very excited because yeah, I've been following her work for a couple of years now, and I'm a fan. And let me just introduce you to Minette, and and invite her as well to share more about herself. So, Minette Norman is an award winning author. She's a speaker and leadership consultant. And she was also a former Silicon Valley software executive who has spent decades leading global teams across the world, right? In Asia, in the US, and Europe, everywhere. And Yeah, so she has learned her own, from her own experience, how to, she has learned and developed her own ways to create inclusive team cultures, to drive performance, and to create a conducive environment for breakthroughs and innovation to happen. And in her most recent position before starting her consultancy, she was the vice president of engineering practice at Autodesk, and she was responsible for influencing more than 3,500 engineers around the globe. And I'm like just trying to picture that in my mind. I'm like, whoa, it's a lot of people. Just like, yeah. And she was focused on state of the art engineering practices while nurturing a collaborative and inclusive culture. And she is the author of The Boldly Inclusive Leader. I have a book, and she's also the co-author of the Psychological Safety Playbook. I've shared that with my colleague Pav, who's behind the scenes right now. And she is also committed to helping leaders unleash their full potential, and the potential of the people that they lead. So, presenting Minette, thank you for joining us. Minette, would you like to, yeah, say hi and share anything else that you would like us to know about you?
Well, you've given me such a lovely introduction. I'm just happy to be here. And I will just say, as a means of introduction, when I was that executive with the 3,500 people I had to work with around the globe, I spent pretty much all of my day in meetings. And a lot of those meetings were not very productive. And in a lot of those meetings, I didn't speak up. And in a lot of those meetings, when I did speak up, it didn't go well. And so I have a very personal connection to meetings. And I feel like every client that I work with talks about the amount of time they spend in meetings, of course, and that they are not run very deliberately. And so I'm on a mission to change that, because I truly believe that you can change the culture of your organization by how you conduct your meetings.
Yeah, and I think it's yeah, when you said how to run those meetings deliberately, right? That really struck a chord within me. I was like, yeah, there's so many meetings that are just meetings for the sake of meetings, you know. So I'm so excited
Exactly.
to yeah, just really unpack that. And before we get into the meat of things, I just wanted to kind of like set the stage for our conversation, right?
Yeah.
So obviously we've chosen to focus on meetings and how to ensure that every voice is heard. Um, and Yeah, I just want to understand from you, from your perspective, why is it important for every voice to be heard? What's the benefit to the business, to the team, to the individual?
It's such an important question, and I'm glad you're starting with that, because it's not just for feel good. It's not just to make everyone feel good, although that will be a byproduct of hearing all the voices. But there's so much evidence and research that shows that if you can hear all the voices, meaning you can get all the ideas out and people feel free to share what's on their mind, what they're seeing, what maybe is a risk that they want to expose, a question, an important question that they want to ask. If you can get all of that out, you will have better performance because you've got more perspectives, right? And we avoid this groupthink where everyone thinks alike and doesn't challenge the status quo. If you can get all the ideas out, you have better performance. You also have more innovation. And innovation, obviously, in today's world, it's so important that we stay ahead and that we're constantly looking for new and better ways to do things. Innovation comes not from like one solitary genius. It usually comes from a bunch of people who do not see things eye to eye, who can put all the ideas on the table. They can debate them, they can have discussions about them, and then they can refine all the ideas to come out with the best solution. But that's going to take, and why this is so important is that it doesn't just happen by saying, everyone share what's on their mind, which people love to say, like, this is a safe environment, just speak up, right? It doesn't happen by flipping a switch. First of all, you have to have this foundation of what's called psychological safety, which is the belief that in this group, it is okay for me to ask a question or disagree with someone else or offer a new perspective, knowing that I will not be marginalized, I will not be excluded, I will not be embarrassed, and it will not be career limiting for me to do any of those things. So if we have that psychological safety, then we can really bring in all the voices. And then what happens, this is sort of the relationship between psychological safety and inclusion. When you feel safe, then everyone feels that they are valued for who they are, for the life experience that they bring, for their ideas. They feel they can truly participate. And they feel that they're a part of this group. They have the same opportunities as others. So you then get the best of your workforce. And I guess what I'll just conclude with here is that if you don't have any of these things, if you don't have psychological safety, if people feel like I'm not really welcome here or my voice is not welcome, then you may have a brilliant workforce, but you're not going to be able to bring out the brilliance in everyone because people are too worried about, I'm going to be marginalized, I'm going to be embarrassed. And so I'm just not going to share this wild idea I have that may be the breakthrough idea your team needs.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up that the foundation is really, it's got everything to do with how psychologically safe people feel, right? And I'd like to hear from you, what are some ways in which leaders or managers can foster that psychological safety for their teams, even outside of the meetings, right?
Yeah, it's not just in meetings. It is in every single human interaction that a leader has. They have the opportunity to foster psychological safety, increase it, or they have the opportunity to mess it up, to decrease it by an inadvertent ignoring someone or dismissing them or interrupting them. So, one of the, and that I co-wrote this playbook on psychological safety with Carolyn Helbig, and in that we offer 25 ideas on how you as a leader or a team member can create a psychologically safe team environment. And I'm just going to share like a few things from that. But the first thing that we say in the book, the first idea we share is that you have to deliberately invite other perspectives. And a great way to do that is, even if you get up and you give a great presentation and you're super well prepared and you think you know it all, but then you ask the question, what am I missing? What am I missing? Or in a group setting, you ask, what are we missing? And then you wait and you let there be a little bit of silence and you wait for people to share their perspectives. And honestly, the first time you do that, people will not believe that you really mean it and they won't say anything. But over time, if you do this as a regular practice, you will start to get those other ideas that are not coming out in a team environment or just one-on-one. So that's the first thing. And then, I always say after that is then you have to listen. Then you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to listen to things that challenge you. You have to be willing to listen to things that, may upset you, even that put you on the defensive, and you have to manage your reactions when you get defensive. You have to realize that, okay, if I'm truly going to invite different perspectives, then there are going to be things that I don't agree with. And so how am I going to show up? How am I going to keep fostering psychological safety? Well, I have to make sure that I don't respond badly if someone challenges me. I have to respond, with a curious question or a thank you to make sure that person knows that their voice really was welcome. So those are just a few entry points into psychological safety.
Yeah, and I think there's so much that we can share about that, and these things that we can do, or like leaders or managers can do, extend to all the different types of interactions, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so let me bring myself back to the focus of the our conversation. So yeah, we're talking about meetings, and I'm curious to hear from you, your thoughts on how meetings actually reflect the dynamics of a team or organization and its culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And here I'm just going to draw from some personal experience because I think just real stories really bring it home, I think. So what happens so often in meetings is that the reason I say it reflects the dynamics of the team that you're a part of is, let's say you're in a leadership meeting and the senior leader is sitting at the head of the table. I mean, I used to sit in these meetings with my peers, and literally the head of the team sat at the head of the table, and it was almost like we were in, it's the time we were mostly all together in the same room, and there was almost even a hierarchy in where people sat in that room. Like the inner circle, the people who were closest to that senior leader sat closest to that head of the table. And then the people who felt like they were maybe a little bit not in the inner circle, while we were farther away. So there was even that, right? Like that there was the inner, there's sense of like who is close to the leader, who is their right hand person, and then who is maybe a little bit on the outside. And that's a common team dynamic. And it shows really like who are the favorites, who get the opportunity, and who doesn't get the opportunity. And then the other thing that I saw so much of is like who gets listened to in those meetings. And it was often those same people who were closer to the leader really, turned to a lot and would ask for their opinion. And the others of us maybe couldn't even get a word in edgewise, or we weren't sure that if we spoke up that we wouldn't get ignored or embarrassed or kind of brushed aside or eye rolled or anything. And so you see those meeting dynamics, you see those team dynamics play out in meetings, and people ask me sometimes when I'm working with them, well, how can I tell if I have a safe and inclusive environment? And one of the first things I say is just notice how your meetings are run. Notice who speaks and who doesn't. Notice who gets listened to. Notice who gets ignored. These are all things that are going to be pretty strong clues about what's going on in your team culture. So that's why I say that the dynamics just play out there. And what we have to do then, I think, as leaders, as team members, is first of all become aware of them, and then realize that we don't have to have them play out that way. We can be deliberate. I'm going to say that word again. We can design meetings that will be inclusive to everyone and that will break down that barrier of who's in that inner circle and who's on the outside.
Mm, mm, mm.
Have you seen that? I mean, Sabrina, I know
I
you just posted
Yes,
about your experience in
yeah,
meetings. So.
and I have so many thoughts coming up, and I was like, where do I take this? Because I so firstly, as you're sharing about like yeah, where people sit, who talks, who doesn't, who gets listened to, and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just very interesting because like as an outsider, just looking in, if I was just imagining if we were just standing behind a two-way mirror and just watching a meeting unfold, you can just tell based on what you're seeing what's going on in this team, right? If the
Yes.
leader is just speaking the entire time and no one else speaks, I think a lot of the time in many meetings it's like leader speaking to the whole group, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that really productive? Is that it for me it's like, oh, it's unsafe here. The leader is king and that's it, right?
Yes. Yes.
um, and the other thing that came up for me is in a hierarchical culture. So I can
Mhm.
imagine like yeah, I think in Singapore and some Asian cultures where it's like the boss is a boss, and the boss is the one who makes all the decisions and gives the direction typically. In our culture it's very much like okay, even growing up in our homes, right? Father is the breadwinner and household, listen to him, he decides everything, and children, you keep quiet, you shut up for your own good
Right.
because dad or mom knows better, right? So the these this culture or these behaviors are so ingrained from a young age that when we go into the workplaces it continues in a way, right? Like the senior person gets the final say and I should not be speaking up,
Right.
right? um so I yeah, I wonder what's on my mind is yeah, I'm just wondering, is that healthy, and how can we overcome those very ingrained ways of being within
Mhm.
certain
Mhm.
cultures, right?
Yeah, and what you're talking about is, deeply ingrained culture. So not just workplace culture, but this is just your culture as a community, as Singaporeans, for example, or Indians or Japanese or whoever you are as a society. You of course have your cultural norms, and it's not that they're good or bad. It's just that they are what they are. Then you go into the workplace, and in some cases, like as you're describing, in a way, you're sort of fighting against that culture of like, well, there's a hierarchy and we respect the boss and the boss has the final say. And that's what we've all grown up with. And ideally, even in cultures where that is just the norm, ideally, a boss, the most senior person, I hope realizes that there are great ideas everywhere. And you never know where the best idea is going to come from. So even if you think, yes, you're in charge, and yes, you're the most senior person in the room, and it is your responsibility to make the decisions, I would think that you would still want to solicit input from throughout your organization, because what my experience was, and it didn't matter how high I rose in the organization, I would find like little nuggets of wisdom and great ideas way, way down in my organization, not like my direct reports, but like 3 levels down. And that only comes from listening to them, finding opportunities to gather their input. And so I think, even in a hierarchical culture, you can find ways to get input from people, but it may not be, for example, in that meeting. Like it may be that you say, I'd like to know, what am I missing? And everyone is silent because you don't dare tell the senior most person that they're missing something important. But what if then you had an anonymous way to collect some input? And if you said like, okay, if you don't have anything in the room today, I'm going to have whatever it is, a way to post something on an online whiteboard or a wiki or some way I'm going to take input, and it can be anonymous or not, but so that people have time to think and provide their input, so that you as the most senior leader are tapping into the collective genius of your organization. I think that transcends cultures, but we have to be clever about how we get people to speak up, because especially I learned this, coming from the West and coming from the US and when I started working with teams in Asia, I realized that my communication style didn't necessarily work, and that I had to flex a little bit and adapt. And then, my employees in Shanghai and Singapore adapted to me, and we learned to communicate in kind of different ways for all of us. But I think we all have to be just open to realizing that our way of communication is not the only way. And who do I have in the room? And maybe we have a very mixed room, a virtual room of people from all over the world and all different cultures. What is our common language, and what are our
Mhm.
kind of our agreements on how we work together, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I love to. Yeah, I love your insights there around having the common language and agreements
Mhm.
around how everyone's going to participate in the meetings, right? And I guess before we go into that, I wanted to also hear from you. You know, what's like. So we've talked about how meetings can disempower people,
Mhm.
right, from speaking up. But what is the dream here, right? What is the dream for yeah what's a dream meeting where things are healthy, inclusive, and productive as well? And I'm also wondering, as a secondary layer to that, like there are obviously different types of meetings, right? So
Mhm.
what is the dream for different types of meetings as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are so many different kinds of meetings for sure. I mean, like one's a brainstorming meeting, and one's a decision, and one's just I'm going to give you a brain dump and tell you, so you all hear. There are all kinds of meetings. There's just the staff meeting updates, whatever it is. I guess like the dream state is that, first of all, it's useful, right? I mean, like we organize a lot of meetings that are not useful and that could have been an email, right? And so make sure you know why you're meeting, and that's the first thing. And
Yeah.
then maybe like also, who are you including, and are you including the right group of people? Are you including a diverse enough group of people so that you're going to get different perspectives, especially if you are trying to gather input or do brainstorming? Then you want to have a wide net of like, oh, we don't want everyone who thinks alike or is from the same discipline or team here. We want a broader net. So, but for me, like I have been in amazing meetings, and so as you said, the dream, let me kind of paint the dream of meetings that I thought were the best meetings I was a part of. And those were everyone, I would say, and not necessarily by the clock, but that everyone who was in the room or in the virtual room spoke approximately about the same amount. So there was already just this sense of equity that we all have voices that are important. And then it's not that we all agree, that we can actually put out an idea and debate them. And then in that dream meeting that people are not challenging your idea because they're trying to embarrass you or make you feel bad. They're challenging your idea because they want to make the best product or the best solution, and that we all have one another's interest in just creating something great together. So if I'm challenging you, it's not personal, it's because I'm trying to get to the best solution. And then I would also say in those dream meetings, we laugh. We're able to have some levity and like realize that yes, work is important and that this is serious business, and we're human, and laughter can be the best medicine in the moment when we mess something up or we are just stuck or someone says something wrong, and like we can just enjoy that we're human. And then we come out of that meeting not having wasted an hour or 90 minutes, but feeling like we got something done. We made a decision. We brainstormed incredible ideas. And I felt like I was a part of this group.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you is, yeah, there's a feeling of being energized and maybe a certain level of flow as well, where, yeah, because I'm contributing productively and being challenged, we got somewhere together that we could not have done before in a way.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I always, I was actually, I had to do this little promo video for a webinar that I'm doing on inclusive leadership. And the expression I use was, how we say I always get it wrong. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that to me applies to teams and applies to meetings. It's like that we could come up with something so much better as a group than any single one of us could alone. But we can only do it if we find a way to really include everyone and hear all the voices and have real discussion. And that is not a given. And that's not honestly the norm in many meetings.
Yeah, and it's so true. And upon reflection, I also realized that it's just because we may not know how to do it, right?
Yes.
It's not
Yeah.
something we're born into the world and we know how to do this automatically, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm like, man, this all of this can be learned. And I mean, I learned for myself, when I was reading your books, I was like, oh, there's some things that I had no idea or I didn't even consider doing, right? Um,
Right.
yeah, and so, well, so many things I want to ask, but thank you for painting the dream. As you're sharing that, I was like, yeah, I've had meetings where I have lived the dream, but still also many that I was like, could have been a bit better, or there's some things I could have been better, I could have done better. Some things that I felt that, or the format could have been more conducive for enabling every voice to be heard, or
Yeah.
yeah, you know a bit more like debate going on to feel safer to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So much to say. I can before okay, just right before we jump into all the what can we do, right? I have a question because you mentioned one line around a lot of meetings can just be an email, but when should an email be a meeting, right?
When
Like
should
when
it
should
email be? Yeah.
Yeah, when should an email or like a Slack conversation be a meeting?
Yeah, I know, and we definitely. I remember doing like, let's just have an hour when we're all on Slack together, and maybe that'll be as useful. I think when it should be a meeting is when you really do want to get input from others, or when it's critically important that everyone hear the same thing at the same time. Because emails and Slacks and all of these other kinds of ways of digital communication, there's no guarantee. I mean, there's obviously no guarantee in the meeting that everyone's listening either, but let us say that it's easier to miss an email or not read that email or get distracted while you're having a long chat in Slack. And so when you want everyone to hear the same thing, make a decision, do brainstorming, I think those are, like get together on a strategy that you're forming together, co-create something. I think that's the time for a meeting. I think a lot of sort of status and update things do not need to be meetings. And with my staff, I remember my staff that I had just before I left my last job. It was a very senior staff, and we used to do updates, and then we realized like this is not a good use of our time. So we would just have it. We had a wiki. We would put our updates on the wiki. We would ask everyone to read so you knew what was there, and then we would bring to the meeting things we wanted input on, or that we felt was like really important to share, to, like, this is really important. It's in my status report, but I want you to understand it because it's going to have impact for all of you, or something like that. Or I need your opinion, or I have a question. Those are the times where it really makes sense to get everyone together.
Yeah, yeah. No, that status one is, I think it's a very common thing across companies. Like,
Oh,
okay,
it's such a waste of time.
and then there are also like stand-ups every day in the morning, So, and that's usually a
Yeah.
status thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and those stand-up meetings, I mean, I get that for, for agile development and things, like the whole idea of the stand-up. But I mean, I think you still have to question how we're using that, even if it's a 15-minute stand-up. Is it useful? And like, if not, what do we do differently? Can we skip
Yeah.
it, or is there something else we can do? Or if
Yep.
we're going to do it, how do we make it a great 15 minutes, right? A useful 15 minutes.
Yeah, no. So I just got to share from what we've done in our team, right? So we used to have, I think we used to do stand-ups 3 times a week in the mornings, and then I realized that it wasn't really doing much for the team. So I kind of just changed that into okay, every morning, just by 10 a.m. share in bullet points what you're up to on Slack. Okay, that's it. And if anyone needs any clarification, just ask in Slack, right? Or ask for a meeting. So that was my own learning. I saved everyone like an hour a week by doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Whew, okay, so let's get into the how tos, and later we will have an opportunity to dive into like the various nuances. I already see a question on
I
screen.
know there's a juicy
Right.
question in the chat right
Very, that
now.
was a juicy one, and I was like, "Whoa, I want to get there." However, let's just talk a little bit about like tangible things that we can do right now, today, or this week in our upcoming
Mhm,
meetings to make it a bit
mhm,
more inclusive, to enable people to contribute in a way that's safer and more comfortable for them, right?
mhm.
So, what are some of the most impactful actions that leaders can take to create that psychological safety in their meetings?
Mhm. Well, I think one of the things is before you even get to the meeting, and that is that if, for example, if you are going to have a meeting where you're going to solicit input, or you're going to do some brainstorming, or you're going to create something together, give an agenda in advance, so that this is what's inclusive about this, is that there, like you said, I'm introverted, right? And I need a little bit more time to process. There are lots of people, whether introverted or just whatever, the way their brains work, that they need some time to think on their own, that they need some quiet time. Like in a room with a bunch of people is not going to be the best for them. So tell the people who are coming to this meeting, what are you going to be doing at the meeting? What do you want them to think about in advance? What ideas do you want them to bring to the meeting? And give them some time to think about that when they're quiet on their own. I learned that from doing things the opposite and realizing that it wasn't. I had someone on my team who was very introverted and said, Minette, I would have done so much better on this if you had given me the assignment in advance, because I need time alone. I'm like, oh, yes, not everyone thinks out loud like the extroverts, right? So that's the first part. And then I think when you do have your meetings, one of the best things that we can all do is to create some agreements on how are we going to run our meetings. And that can be as simple as, how will we take turns speaking? Are we going to call on everybody? Are we going to raise our hands if you have something to say? How are we going to manage the airtime? Because many people talk and talk and talk and never stop, and then no one else gets to speak. So how do we politely interrupt Minette when she's speaking too much? How do we say, Minette, thanks for your contribution, we want to hear from Sabrina? Like, what are the rules of engagement for that? How do we deal with interruptions? If I'm in the middle of something and someone interrupts me, how do we handle those things? How do we, gracefully say, like, Minette didn't get to finish, let's let Minette finish before we go on to another topic? These types of things. How will we invite dissenting viewpoints? How are we going to do all this? So one thing that we can do is that we can deliberately have someone facilitate the meeting. And it doesn't have to be the leader of the meeting or the team. One of the things that we recommend in our psychological safety playbook is that we have someone play this role of what we call as an inclusion booster. But what we're basically saying is have someone facilitate to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak who wants to speak, and that we get to hear from everybody, and then agree as a group on what are we empowering this facilitator to do, and how are we going to stop the interruptions and stop the people speaking too much and invite the quieter and voices. And then I also really am a big fan of digital tools, because I think that these can be much more safe and inclusive than just having to be the loudest voice and raise your hand and speak. So, for example, if you're trying to get a lot of ideas out, I would like to have some quiet time. Like maybe we give everyone 3 minutes to formulate their ideas and put them all on a virtual whiteboard on sticky notes. That's honestly, that you can get an incredible number of ideas out quickly. And then you can go and discuss each one of them and then have an agreement. How will we go through all of these? How will we, maybe we want to do some dot voting on like which ones of these jump out that we really want to talk about more as a group. Use the chat, use the tools that you have, because I think you'll notice that not everyone speaks, even when you invite them to speak, but that doesn't mean they don't have something to say. So these are starting points. But when I work with groups with my clients, one of the things I ask them to do is, I'm going to give you some of these ideas, like have a turn taking rule, whatever it is. But the best thing you can do is craft your own set of meeting agreements or meeting charters. And I have seen a team put together a set of agreements in 5 minutes that completely changed the way they run their meetings, and that then changed the culture over time.
Oh, that's incredible. I want to see those 5 agreements. But and before that, yeah, I think two things came up as you were sharing with me. I'm taking so many notes down. Um, yeah. Okay. Firstly, I just wanted to call out how powerful what you said was. So you shared, or you just said that even those who don't, like, for even though there are people who don't speak, it doesn't mean that they don't have something to say. And that's so true. Yeah, it doesn't mean that they don't have something to say, and it's really about giving them the opportunity and to kind of meet them where they're at, as opposed to expecting them to adapt to the format that you're used to, in a way, right? Which brought to mind also how powerful the digital tools can be, to help people just formulate what they want to say before they even say it, or they may not want to say it, but they want a place to say what they want to say, right? And yeah, it's a huge contrast between, so what usually happens, I find, I was at a conference recently, and also a big meeting where the presentation ends, or the sharing ends, and then the speaker just asks the floor of like 50 people, hey, so does anyone want to ask a question, and then suddenly like 10 people line up to ask a question, but then there's me who's like, I do, but like I haven't fully formulated what I wanted to say, and I'm just like, my heart's like beating. I'm like, shall I stand up and then formulate it on the way there? But like, my nerves just like take over. So that kind of just paralyzes me from like speaking, even though I have things to say. And then
Yeah.
yeah, and then I'm like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why can these people just go up to the mic and take 5 minutes of airtime and just think out loud?
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that. And I don't know who those 10 people were that they're willing to do that, but there are definitely patterns that you will see. And, what I saw a lot, especially in tech. So, it was very much a male dominated group that I was in, and just in the industry in general. And what you often found was that many of the men were willing to speak more than the women were, and that the women felt, and this was common, it's not just men and women, it's really like anyone who feels like they're not in the majority, or anyone who feels like they're maybe a little bit on the outside, that those people feel just the way you did, that they have to prepare the most brilliant thing, the most perfectly phrased and crafted statement or question before they'd be willing to get up and share that. Whereas people who are more dominant and who feel more comfortable are just willing to speak off the top of their head. Or maybe it's the introverts versus the extroverts. There are lots of different identities that will make a person more comfortable speaking off the cuff and just offering something not perfect versus feeling like you have to get it perfect. And that getting it perfect is often going to prevent you from getting up and getting, asking that question or sharing that idea. And that's the kind of thing that I'm always trying to get to. Like, how do we hear from those people?
Yeah, no, that, and it's interesting that you mentioned that around, when you're in the minority in that room.
Yes, whatever that is. Yeah.
Yeah, and this one instance I could remember so clearly in my mind was, so I was in the U.S. I was in SF, attending a conference, right? And it was my first time attending a US based conference, and I was like, oh, I want to ask so many things. I have so many things to say, but all these people just leapt to their feet, and I need to say the right thing, you know. So I definitely felt like I was the minority in the room, and it was interesting to observe that the feelings that came up,
Mm-hmm.
and reflecting on it as you shared about, how to make it more inclusive. And also, so just to add on that, talking about digital tools, the way that we facilitated a lot of meetings at Calm Collective is we always have like a little bit of a pause to think, and we would have that Mentimeter up for people to just share their thoughts before we invite people to speak.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, it was kind of just like creating it out of my own experience. But
That's
yeah,
great. Yeah.
yeah,
I think
I feel
having
like,
more silence in meetings, more time to think, can be game changing because yeah, that's a little bit the equalizer of like because the people who think on their feet are going to speak first, but okay, we're going to have a minute of silence for everyone to put in
mm,
their thoughts. And yeah, I use another tool like Slido, but Mentimeter, same thing. How do we get all the ideas out there and give people a little time
yeah,
to reflect?
and being more comfortable with silence as well. Um,
Exactly. Yes.
mm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing your tips. I think we got quite a few things, and I'm so excited to reflect on those as well. So,
There's so much more. So that was just like the
so
brief
many
thing,
things.
but yeah, but there's some
Yeah,
interesting questions already that I know we could take. Or
I
so
think we can take. Yeah, let's take them. Okay, so we have. Let's. Which one shall we go to first? Very
the
juicy.
one from
Minette.
Natalie was first, and then there's one
Yeah,
from Weiwei.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's address Natalie's question. So I'll read it out. Would it not be a double-edged sword when soliciting responses with ideas but not following through on them? So if everyone is, kind of just giving their ideas
Yep.
and then you don't follow through, um, and obviously from all the ideas there'll be some that are not relevant. Wouldn't it be dismissive, potentially, and cause additional, worse effects if you don't follow through and acknowledge those? How do you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Yeah. So Natalie, thank you so much for that. I think it's an important question, and I've actually heard the same question from clients, and I think it's important to address. So first of all, to be clear, asking for all the ideas does not mean, and I think we need to be clear about this and state it, it doesn't mean we can do them all, right? I mean, you can get 100 ideas and maybe we can pursue two of them. So I think whoever is the leader of this team or the facilitator of the meeting is that to be clear that we're going to gather as many ideas as possible and then we're going to narrow and we're going to get to whatever the final solution or decision is. So be clear about who the decision maker is, all of those kinds of hygiene things that we do. Now, what I think is really important is not to dismiss anything, and the idea that especially if we're brainstorming, we do not dismiss anything. Any idea is welcome. However, we're not going to implement them all. And so to then loop back after, if there's a decision or if we're moving forward on just a couple of these ideas, to loop back and explain why you chose the things that you did, what was the rationale, and not to make anyone feel bad that their idea was not the one that went forward, but instead to say like, we are going to gather as many as possible, and that means we can't implement them all. However, we still want them. They're going to help us think better. They're going to help us get to the best solution. And we want this to continue the next time we ask. So, not to make anyone feel like, well, I'm going to be, I'm not going to offer my ideas again because they didn't implement them last time. Right. That's that sort of cynicism where we just feel like they don't really care. But to explain, like, this is how we reached our decision. This is how we're going to move forward. These ideas are not lost. Perhaps they would come forward again when we're trying something else. So just to let people know that they were not ignored or dismissed or thought of as stupid or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Sharing the rationale for the eventual decision, and I wonder whether it's also helpful as you're soliciting or inviting participation to introduce the constraints. But
Uh-huh.
obviously, there's only so much that the person leading the team can share or even knows, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be really practical. I used to love this one exercise we would do where you'd get all the ideas out. So first of all, it's just all the ideas, and then you would put them on a matrix, and it's basically impact versus difficulty. It's like a 4-box grid. You've probably done it, and so what you want to do is the highest impact and the lowest difficulty. Those are the things that are like the no brainers, right? And then there may be brilliant ideas with high impact but very, very difficult, right? And so, what is the constraint? Maybe we don't have enough time or enough money. And so, we're going to go for the one that is less difficult. Or maybe it's a great idea, but the impact is relatively small and we want to go for the bigger one. So, I think there are a lot of great design thinking tools you can use also to not just have brainstorm, but then, like, how do we make decisions and what are the criteria and constraints that we're going to use?
yeah, that's a tool that I've used as well.
You have
So
to, yeah.
yeah. So my word for it was impact versus ease, right?
Uh huh. Right. Uh huh.
And then we'll come out of it and like, oh, it's actually very difficult to do that. Let's not do it.
Exactly. We could do it in 5 years, but not now,
Not
right?
today, yeah, not immediately. But this one is high impact and easy to do, so let's do that. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
and that can be collaborative as well. So yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's go for another question from Wei Wei. And the question is, what would you recommend to manage interruptions and finding the opportunity to hear from others when it's difficult to pause or to interject when a person
Yeah.
is taking up a lot of airtime?
I love this question, Wei Wei, and it's something I have actually gotten really good at because I've been facilitating these workshops and this program. And so I have learned, and it is honestly something I've had to learn how to interrupt someone who's going on too long. And one of the best things that I think we can do, it's an agreement that we make as whoever's running the meeting or the group. When someone is taking up a lot of airtime, the person running the meeting, whether it's the lead of the meeting or the facilitator that you have assigned for this today's meeting, that person is going to have an agreement with everyone else on how they're going to call a timeout. So, one thing I like to like, there's the sports timeout. I don't know if this is universal. This in the US, we have this symbol for timeout in sports.
Yeah.
You do the same one? Yeah. Okay. I
Or
didn't
at
know.
least I do. Yeah.
Timeout, that can be one. It's like timeout or hand raise or clapping. Sometimes people do clapping, whatever it is, something to signal that we're going to move on to someone else. So agree so that it's not embarrassing in the moment, because it can be really embarrassing if someone starts like saying, Minette, come on now, stop, please, someone else to
Yeah.
talk. And now I'm like, I'm so embarrassed that I went on too long. So we don't want to shame anyone, but we just agree, like, timeout. We want to hear from some other people. So thanks so much. We're going to move on. And now we're going to go to Annie, and Annie has something to say, right? And I think getting used to doing that, that's something that I have now gotten comfortable with. But the first time you do it, it's really uncomfortable because, as you pointed out, Wei, sometimes you can't even get a pause. There's no pause for you to interject. So you probably have to do some kind of sign, stop, right, or stop, or whatever. Or like, I think it would actually be really fun. Someone I saw do this had little things that they held up, like timeout flag, or like a sign that they held up. I don't have
Yeah.
one. Let's imagine this was like a stop sign or something like that.
Yeah.
A pause. I think what would be really good is like a picture of a pause button. Just pull up the pause button, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, no, thank you for the tip. I'm gonna try, yeah, because I'm always in situations where these things happen.
Oh, it's
So
so common. And the people,
yeah,
it's not that they're bad people, it's that they get carried away. They don't have the self-awareness to realize that they're talking too much, right?
yeah, yeah, and that's totally fine. And everyone has, each day is different, and
Yeah.
sometimes I'm the one over, taking up a lot of time because I'm like, "Blah, blah, blah," I just want to share everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for that. I'm so curious to see how everyone finds their way to manage this. So if anyone has any ideas, feel free to share in comments as well. Okay, we have another question coming in from Kimberly. So, how should one respond to a boss who is not encouraging psychological safety? Ooh, what are your
Oh,
thoughts?
Kimberly, this one's such a hard one. And honestly, again, a question I get so much because we can control only so much. And then if our boss is not, like if our boss is shaming people and putting them down and not letting them speak, it can be very, very challenging. And so, I think that if you have at all of a relationship with the boss, could you have that conversation one-on-one with them that is very specific about a specific behavior they're doing and the impact it's having on you? Like, in this meeting, when whatever, when you totally said my idea was terrible, I felt really embarrassed in front of my colleagues. And I don't think you meant to do it, but I want you to know the impact it had. Like if you could have that honest and vulnerable conversation, not everyone can, and not every boss is open to it. But if you think that's a possibility, I think that's an option because perhaps they don't know what they're doing. I think so often anyone, and especially people in leadership roles, don't understand the impact of their every move and every action and every reaction, but it's having a real impact on people. So if that's a possibility, to have the conversation with them or get a group of people who are willing to go together and talk about it. If you don't think the boss is at all open-minded and that there really is a problem in the team, then I think you're kind of limited to what you can, how much can you influence versus how much can you control with your own team or with your peers. Like you can at least treat each other really well, and you can try to model the behavior you wish that your leader would actually enact, but you may not be able to change them. So I think in that case you want to just do what you can, what's in your control and your sphere of influence. And if it's not a possibility to change the leader's behavior, you can always try going to get some help from HR or someone else, but these things don't always go your way, and so you have to decide, like, how much am I willing to put myself on the line versus how much am I going to do, what's in my control. So there's no one size fits all for that really tough question, Kimberly. And I think it depends on the person who is the boss, and if there's an inkling of open-mindedness there, then maybe you could have a helpful conversation with them.
Yeah, yeah. Can I just ask a follow-up question on that? How
Of
can
course.
you? Because I can imagine a lot of people in leadership, a lot of bosses may they're probably handling so many things, right?
Yeah,
And you're so right in saying that every little thing that the boss does is a signal to the rest of the team,
that's right.
um, yeah, as to whether it's safe or not. Um, and if the boss is like kind of swept away in the day to day, and they're just not self aware, but they seem like they guard it and they're not open to feedback. What's a safe way to like kind of like have a litmus test as to whether the person might be open to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like assuming that you get a chance to talk to them one-on-one, because I mean, you really can't do this in a group setting, right? Like give the leader feedback in a staff meeting is probably not going to go well, right? But do you have a one-on-one with this person? Or does someone you're close to who could be your spokesperson have a one-on-one? Like maybe it is the HR partner or whatever. But and it's to ask maybe not the most challenging question, but to offer something like, you know, I know you've got a ton of things on your plate, and this may not seem top of mind, but I want to offer you something I observed. Are you interested in hearing how it came across? Because I think you did something you didn't mean to do, like in a really gentle way. And then then see how that goes. And if there's like, if you get the body language like, no, I do not want to hear from you, just say like, okay, just let me know if there's a better time for it, if you're open to it at some point. Just something I observed, and I obviously want to make you succeed and all of us succeed together.
Yeah.
So something that's impacting that, just like give it a hint, like it's impacting the team dynamics, it's impacting our ability to do our best work, whatever it is. So that's what I would try as like a test balloon to see.
Mm. Just floating it over to you.
Over with that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Minette. So I'm just looking at the clock and realizing
I
that,
know.
wow, how did the hour kind of just go by?
So quickly.
Yeah, and then you know what? There's just so much more to share and to unpack around this conversation. So I guess as a final question for you, Minette, before we close our conversation today, what is one small step? What is one small step that each of us can take towards building a more inclusive team culture or more inclusive meetings that we can even implement today?
Hmm. I think every single person, no matter what level they're at, can commit to getting really curious to hear other perspectives, to listen better, and to create space for others to speak. And if you're the one who is the really quiet one, then the tip for you is, how might I get my voice heard in a new way? And how might I contribute to this next meeting? And who can help me? Like, are there peers of mine who could be allies to help me make sure I can participate? And if you're the loud one, how can you invite others? So we all have different personalities. How can we make sure that everyone has the best experience in the next meeting that we go to?
Yeah, and how can we help each other? So
Exactly.
so powerful and very, very actionable. Thank you so much, Minette, for sharing. And yeah, thank you everyone for turning up and joining our conversation in the comments. If you have any thoughts to share about yeah, our conversation today, and if you'd like to learn more about Minette's work and yeah, and her book around and her work around psychological safety and inclusion, please go check her work out. Minette, is there anything you want to plug or share? How can they find you?
Oh, yeah. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Go to my website, minettenorman.com, and sign up for my newsletter. I have some free downloads on my website. I'd love to stay in touch.
Yeah, and she's great. Go, yeah, look her up on LinkedIn as well.
Yes,
um,
please.
yeah, and all the best to everyone. And your with your meetings and with connecting more inclusively at work. And yeah, if you'd like to learn more about Calm Collective, you can just scan that QR code or just visit our website, our various social media platforms as well to stay connected. And on that note, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Minette, for
Thank you
being
for
here with
inviting
us.
me.
Yay! Okay, we
It was
still
a
have
great
like
conversation.
yeah, it was. We still have a couple of minutes. I just want to take this opportunity, Minette, as well, to yeah, just thank you so much for our conversation and for connecting. You've been so yeah, just open minded and open hearted to connect with
Mhm.
our community, and I'm just so thrilled that I've been able to connect with you because yeah, your work has also influenced Calm Collective's work and the yeah, and how we're running our own ship and how we help with our other clients as well. So thank you. Yeah, is there anything else you want to share?
First of all, just I'm so glad that you reached out to me. And I guess the last thing I would share, whether it's meetings or anything else, that every single one of you can have a positive experience on the workplace. And it's how you treat others, and it's how you connect with others, and it's how you make other people feel at work. And so don't underestimate the power of very small things to make a huge difference.
So true. Thank you very much. And on that note, we shall close the live stream. Thank you. Thanks, Pav. Pav is behind the scenes.
Thank you. Bye.